What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to What If Deku Ate the Jiki Jiki no Mi, aka the Magnet Fruit. I asked myself, what would happen if we gave a quirkless loser like Izuku Midori the powers of the Magnet Fruit? And I think I kind of nailed it on the head with this one. If you guys want to watch another one of my series where I discuss things about MHAX One Piece, you guys can watch my videos such as What If Deku had half light, half dark, or What If Deku ate the Ope no Mi, or my What If Deku was Luffy's reincarnation video. Those are all free to watch. That said though, the thumbnail maker for today's video art was iCare on Instagram and the creator for the dope image of Izuku AX, useless kid style art thingy-majigger that I had made. That said, if you guys want to enjoy this video at any moment, make sure to smash that like button and also hit that red button so you're notified for all of my future videos, seeing as I upload every day. That said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
So to make this what if work, we're going to be having to cover a couple of things off the bat. Number one, Anko's hair, instead of green in this version, is going to be red. Now, why am I doing this? Honestly, it's just because I want Izuku to actually look like Kid. I want him to look like Kid from One Piece. And this is probably the best way to go about this. His father, Hisashi Midori, is actually going to be a prevalent figure in Izuku's life. And the reason that he is going to be one is because I want him to know about magnets, right? Now, what does that mean? I'm pretty sure many of you guys are probably kind of understanding what I'm trying to do here. But for this whole entire little fanfic thing to work, essentially Hisashi Midoriya has to be a scientist that studies magnets and whatnot. Now, I'm just going to be saying for plot's sake that one day Hisashi ends up coming across the Jiki Jiki no Mi. I apologize for that, but he ends up coming across the Jiki Jiki no Mi, and eventually he ends up studying it. He ends up studying its properties and realizing that it's just a normal fruit. It looks weird, it's something exotic, but it's just a normal fruit. He decides that he's not going to eat it just because it looks cool, and he keeps it around for a while. He's not exactly going to be passing it down to Izuku saying, oh my god, son, you can have this someday. No, eventually Izuku is going to be close with his father, and he's going to actually look into a little bit of magnetism and things of how it works, like learning about magnets and such as, and things such of that nature, I guess you could say, right? Now, Izuku during this time is essentially going to be having a good time with his father, great bond in fact, and once he turns to about the age of 9 years old, it is actually discovered that his father Hisashi contracted an anime disease that he was not able to beat. Eventually, Hisashi ends up losing the battle to the disease, and he ends up pretty much dying to anime cancer. Yep, the thing that killed Hashirama, Itachi, and I would say All Might if it wasn't for the fact that the man literally has a hole in his respiratory system. That said though, basically what ends up happening is Izuku, once his father is dead, he ends up getting more into magnetism, doubling down on it in fact. And eventually one day he ends up coming across a little briefcase that Hisashi had, a little glass container that held this strange looking fruit. Izuku decides that, he wants to try it. His father never did, and he always told Izuku that one day he wanted to eat it. Since he couldn't, Izuku decided that he would live his dream through his father. And so essentially what he does is he opens the glass thing after with a key. He ends up grabbing the fruit, cutting a little piece of it, and then eating it. Once he does so, he realizes that this is the worst sour, rancid tasting thing that he has ever experienced. And Izuku was like, nah, bro, like, what is this? Like, this is disgusting, right? He throws the thing away, but then suddenly it hits him. He feels as if a flood of information just hit his body. It was as if it was meant to be. Izuku realizes that what he just consumed was a devil fruit, the Jiki Jiki no Mi in fact, or in English translation, the magnet fruit. Once Izuku realizes this, he holds his hand out and these weird magnetism, electricity-like force surrounds his hand. When he sees this, he wonders what exactly he could do, and so he ends up pretty much holding his hand out and then using an attack that he makes up on the spot called Repulse. He ends up pretty much shooting everything away from himself that has iron or metal, things that can be magnetized, and it all just shoots away from Izuku in the room. Izuku realizes this and then rushes to his mother Inko, in which he proceeds to tell her that he unlocked his quirk. He doesn't tell her the fact that it's a devil fruit, but they essentially rush Izuku to the quirk doctor, where it's discovered that, yeah, it's strange. Izuku has the left joint, but for some reason he has a quirk. The doctor would say that it might be another type of evolution of quirks or some sort, that it might be strange, but Izuku seems to be a late bloomer, and seeing as it's nothing other than quirks, they're just going to be diagnosing it as such. Izuku is asked what he wants it to be called, and Izuku says, magnetism. That's what I want my quirk to be called. The doctor decides whatever, and from here he ends up writing off that Izuku has a quirk by the name of magnetism. Izuku ends up going home pretty happy, and from here he ends up making his way back to school, where he ends up deciding not to really tell anybody about the fact that he actually has a quirk this time around, but he just goes to school. And while he is, in school, he ends up doing a little bit of training with this devil fruit and a little bit of physical training, since now he knows that he has a devil fruit. Not only that, but Izuku's likes and tastes end up changing through the years, and he ends up turning into a little bit of a personality that Kid has in the One Piece anime, liking punk rock, liking guitars, liking to be a brutal fighter. Izuku, once he grows up more and more, ends up getting into a couple of fights at school, and this would actually lead to Izuku getting a couple of bad things on his record, but regardless, once Izuku signs up for UA, it's not really gonna matter. That said though, Izuku doesn't take anything from anybody anymore, and he actually starts standing up to Bakugo and all of his goonies, as well as most of the people in his class. Eventually though, the day where the teacher would bust in talking about how everybody needs to think about their futures would happen, and Izuku would be in the back of the class jamming out to his music, his rock and roll or whatever, his punk rock, and essentially, he has his headphones on, when suddenly the teacher walks up to Izuku and says, hey Izuku. The teacher takes the headphones off of him, and Izuku is like, oh, what? Sorry, I was distracted. The teacher then looks at him and says, I see you're going to UA. Why exactly are you going there? I thought you were quirkless. Izuku looks at the teacher and says, Teach, it's none of your business. And from here, Bakugo gets up off his seat and says, none of his business? That's the teacher. You gotta mind your manners, Deku. From here, he looks at him and says, what does a nobody like you have anything to do with UA? You're just gonna get yourself killed trying to be a hero, Deku. Like, yeah, you might be able to fight a little bit, but that's it. And Deku looks at him and pretty much ignores him to the end of class, where once the bell rings, Bakugo and his lackeys decide that they want to try to jump Deku. Little did they know, that's not a smart move. Izuku decides to finally unveil the fact that he has a quirk on this very day, and instead of just letting Bakugo get off the hook, Izuku does an attack that Kid is very much famous for. A bunch of garbage and scrap metal ends up coming and surrounding his arm, and Izuku then looks to Bakugo with a smirk on his face before saying the name of the attack. Now, do I remember the name of this attack? I am not going to lie to you guys, I forgot it. So let me look it up real quick and I'll be right back. Okay, and I'm back. And after scouring the internet for a grand total of like 3 seconds, I decided against looking it up. It doesn't really matter. I'm pretty sure you guys know what move I'm talking about, but he basically ends up creating a gigantic arm. Well, not exactly too gigantic, but relatively big in size. That wouldn't kill Bakugo and his goonies, but it would hurt them, right? Now, when Izuku creates this massive arm of scrap metal, he lunges it right at the direction of Bakugo as well as his lackeys, and it ends up hitting them and sending them crashing through the wall. Now, Bakugo and his lackeys were all basically, how do I put this, sent to a state where they could not get up for the lives of them. And Bakugo would look up at Izuku before saying, "You damn Deku," is all he could mutter, before Izuku would grab him by his collar and then begin to punch him in the face over and over and over and over, until Bakugo eventually lost consciousness, and Izuku then proceeded to open the window and jump out of it, before then taking a different path to get home, saying that he wasted enough of his time and that he'll make it up on the walk home. From here, Izuku plays his tunes and begins rocking out as he begins walking on his way home. He then gets towards the sewer, and it is at this moment when the sludge villain eventually jumps out of it and screams, "Give me your body, kid." Izuku looks towards the direction of the sludge villain and is like, absolutely not. From here, he proceeds to use an ability which he didn't really know he had before, but it's something that snaps right at the nick of time. As the sludge villain is approaching Izuku, he activates his not Conqueror's Haki, but his observation Haki for the very first time, as he leaps out of the way of the sludge villain and then uses uses his abilities to essentially create a gigantic metal arm once more, saying that this is getting very annoying as he sends the fist straight crashing towards the direction of the sludge villain, who essentially lets it go through him, as it wasn't gonna do anything to the sludge villain, and seeing as Izuku just didn't have the physical power to do anything. This is when suddenly out of the corner of his eye, Izuku sees All Might bust out and then use a Texas Smash, then going on to bottle the villain and jumping off after Izuku tells him thanks for the save. All Might smiles, signs Izuku's autograph, and then proceeds to get out of the way. This is when Izuku decides to go home, and this is when the 10-month training arc would actually start. During these 10 months, Izuku, during one of the first actual months, he would actually be in school, and after school, he would end up deciding to go to the music shop. He ends up making his way there, trying to buy some new discs, a new guitar maybe, and suddenly he ends up running into some girl by the name of Jiro. Now, I'm pretty sure after hearing that, you guys are like, no, it's a Jiro ship. Zather, what are you doing? Hear me out. I'm gonna fix Jiro's character. Trust, boys. I got y'all. I got y'all. All right. Because of plot's sake, I'm gonna be saying that Jiro is a little more developed, if you catch my drift, right? Not only that, but she has a little bit longer hair than she does in canon, just a little bit longer. Izuku still sees it as short, so when he ends up talking to Jiro and they have their minor interactions, Izuku ends up telling her that, you know, she would look way better with long hair. Jiro would blush, and during the 10 months, he and Jiro would actually actively hang out about like 2 to 3 times a month. They'd text here and then, and Izuku would end up developing a pretty like friendly relationship with Jiro, where he thinks she's like smoking, but at the same time, he prefers girls with long hair. During the 10 months, Jiro would actually grow her hair out a bit and also get a couple of extensions for her hair, and from here, she now has adequate length hair. And Izuku, he kind of likes that. So after the 10 months are over and Izuku's been training with the Jiki Jiki no Mi powers, and you know, he learns a couple more attacks, and he also learns about armament hockey and observation hockey, he ends up deciding that, yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good, you know what I mean? So essentially what Izuku only knows now is some cool abilities with the Jiki Jiki no Mi, armament and observation hockey, and pretty much all the attacks that Yusa's kid would have made. The only difference is Izuku's a lot more intelligent than Eustace is. So essentially the thing that Izuku is able to do that he's not able to is essentially kind of like Gaara from Naruto, take the iron from the earth and bring it to the surface. So like iron sand. And he's able to actually use that and manipulate and conjure it and actually bend metal to his will in a way that Eustace was never able to. He's obviously able to create like gigantic like armors of like pretty much garbage and scrap metal and stuff like that. And he would have actively been training in the what's it called, in Dagoma Beach, just due to the fact that it's an abandoned place with tons of scrap metal. That's where Izuku learned and mastered a couple of his abilities. And when the time of the UA entrance exam eventually it comes around, Izuku's more than prepared for it. So he goes inside, ends up taking the test, bumping into Jiro, wishing her luck, and going on to ace the physical portion of the UA entrance exam. And why do I say he aces this? Well, because Izuku controls iron, metal. And what are these robots made out of? They're literally made out of metal. So when Izuku sees them, he literally goes on to smile and hold his hand out before then saying, "Repel." Suddenly, all these robots would be sent flying in different directions and they would land on the ground, essentially breaking. Izuku would go through the robot portion, essentially using the scraps of metals from the robots and creating his own giant robot that he uses to just start destroying and dismantling other robots. The people watching from the intercoms and things from the cameras would be extremely impressed by Izuku's usage of his quirk in this situation and would be thinking that maybe this might be a challenge. They end up unleashing the 0-pointer, and it's at this point that Izuku looks to Uraraka, who's about to be crushed by some scraps of like earth and like buildings and stuff like that. And he looks towards Uraraka before saying, "Get out of the way!" From here, he sends a scrap of metal to protect her for a bit. Uraraka's able to get out of the way, and from here, Izuku looks up to the monstrosity that is the 0-pointer. Following this, Izuku decides that this is going to be one of the hardest things he's ever done. Izuku goes on to essentially create a gigantic arm that he would use to essentially jump on the top of a building and look directly at the zero pointer with zero fear in his eyes. He then proceeds to yell, "Repel!" As suddenly the strongest beam of energy of repel that he could muster would shoot at the zero pointer and send it toppling to the ground. From here, Izuku smiles and eventually ends up leaving the area, going on to wait for his acceptance letter, which he knows very well is going to be coming to him. Keep in mind, this version of Izuku is smart. He just doesn't show it as much as he would. He also stopped doing that hero book writing thing. He stopped keeping up with weaknesses and stuff like that. And instead of just writing them down, he just memorizes things like that. That said though, eventually Izuku's first day of class would end up coming around, and when Izuku inevitably sees Bakugo in the class, there is a little bit of tension between them. However, he ends up going towards Jiro's direction, who was actually being flirted with by Kaminari. Now Izuku would look to Kaminari up and down and then say, "Who's he?" Jiro just says that it's one of their classmates, and Izuku says, "So, you still up for a date later?" And Kaminari looks at Izuku and is just like, "Oh man." From here, he ends up leaving Jiro alone, and Izuku just smiles to Jiro before she just chuckles and says, "You know, he was getting pretty annoying. I'm glad you came when you did." Izuku would say, "No problem." And from here, he would go on to essentially just talk to Jiro until Aizawa wakes up and tells them all about the Quirk apprehension test. From here, they all go outside and get changed, and Izuku decides that he's gonna be showing off just a little bit, just for Jiro, right? He ends up going outside, and when they're out there, Izuku would look to the direction of, say, Aizawa as he gets tossed the ball to his direction. Izuku catches this and asks what he's supposed to do with this. Aizawa then goes on to explain that he is simply to throw that ball as far as he can within that circle, telling him not to hold back and to do his best. Before Izuku then proceeds to create a gigantic arm and then essentially throw it as far as he possibly can. He ends up getting an impressive score, but he only is able to use nothing but the brutal physical force of the arm that he has, and since Izuku isn't exactly like god tier strength, it ends up going far, just not like insanely far, which I'm not sure how far that would be. I'm not really honest. I'm just gonna be putting, let's say, 1,200 something meters, maybe. Is that far-fetched? I'm not sure, but let's just go with that, okay? Anyways though, essentially everybody else begins to get excited, and it's at this moment that Aizawa reveals to everybody that this is not a game, telling them that since they think this is fun, how about this? Whoever comes in last place will be expelled. Immediately after hearing this, everybody else would be like, "Yo, what do you mean expelled? You can't just expel us. You can't do that. You're not allowed to." Aizawa looks at them and says, "I'm allowed to do whatever I want." And he then proceeds to look at them menacingly before they all just look at Aizawa and they're like, "All right, noted. We're gonna do our best." Aizawa then proceeds to have a chuckle on his face before Deku then turns to the direction of Jiro and then proceeds to ace each and every single one of the Quirk apprehension tests that are in front of him. Izuku goes on to do extremely well in the long jump, the 50-meter dash, the crushing the thing. He uses his magnetic ability to essentially crush it, and actually no, I'm not even gonna say he uses his quirk for that. Izuku's physical strength is on another level, so he's able to actually crush it. Seeing as Eustace Kid in the anime is able to do a lot more than just kind of crush a little inky dinky little grip strength test. So Izuku's able to crush it, right? And from here, he just goes on to ace every other test. Jiro does well, and ultimately Invisible Girl is the one who gets expelled from UA, being told that she was the one who actually ended up getting the weakest markings for this test. She ends up crying, but like, "Oh my god, why?" And from here, Aizawa just proceeds to tell her not to make this harder than it has to be, telling her that while they do this, they might as well talk about the sponsor of today's video, fandom. As anime fans, we love to show our support to our favorite shows by rocking anime apparel. But something I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is it's so expensive. So I've partnered up with Fandom to bring you all affordable, high quality anime merch that you are sure to love. And if you use my code ZETHER at checkout, you can even get an extra 10% off the already affordable merch. Keep in mind, it does come from overseas sellers, so its sizing is going to be different since it's overseas. That said, let's get back into the video. Jumping back into the story, however, after the sponsor break, what ends up essentially happening is basically after the Quirk apprehension test is done, Izuku just turns to Jiro, who at this point looks a little bit similar to, what's her name? Nico Robin. A little bit, just a little bit of hints of Nico Robin in there, you know what I mean? And he ends up proceeding to essentially just go out with her. They end up going to Jiro's place, they end up rocking out for a couple of hours, and then they hit their local Chick-fil-A, which is my personal favorite place to eat at. It's just a godsend place, bro. It's amazing. But anyways, they end up going to Chick-fil-A, they jam out, you know, they're having a good time, they're all enjoying themselves, and eventually they end up just doing their thing, you know what I mean? Like they start doing their thing, if you get what I'm trying to say, you know what I mean? Like they start hitting the books, learning math, you know, algebra, history. They start doing things like that, right? And they get pretty smart. They get pretty smart in the process, might I add. But once they're done doing all this, they eventually end up parting ways, and Izuku just sends a text to Jiro the next morning saying, "Some night, huh?" Jiro says, "Oh, it was amazing." She proceeds to tell him that learning about magnetism was great, that he's actually a pretty smart person, that he should show that side of him some more. Izuku's like, yeah, let me show that side some more, you know what I mean? From here though, what basically ends up happening is they end up going on to have a couple of days worth of getting to know each other before suddenly they find themselves in their last period of class 2 days later, and All Might ends up busting in the door yelling, "I am here." Like for part 2.